Welcome back to Awesome Software Testing and Quality Talks YouTube channel. In this podcast with Bas Dijkstra, we talk about several aspects related to automation for testing. Let's go. Once again, welcome back to Software Testing and Quality Talks. We have had a fabulous 2022 in software testing and quality. One of the key components that aid in software testing is automation. There are several aspects to using automation for testing, and the usage only keeps growing as the technology gets more and more complex because of quick delivery capabilities and software dependencies. Thus, it's so important to keep us abreast of all that's happening in automation for testing, as well as have a good idea about several concepts surrounding automation for testing. Towards that, we have with us today Bas Dijkstra, who is a well-known test automation expert. Bas is an independent test automation consultant and trainer. Bas has been active in the test automation field for 16 years. He has worked on software testing and automation solutions across a wide range of programming languages, frameworks, and technology stacks. Bas has delivered test automation training to dozens of companies and hundreds of conference attendees in the Netherlands as well as abroad to excellent reviews. Bas lives in Amersfoort in the Netherlands with his wife and two sons. When he is not at work, he likes to go outside for a long run or to sit down and read a good book. Welcome, Bas, to our podcast. So, Bas, to start off the discussion, let's talk about the role of automation for testing. Many of us who have been testing for decades and have testing as our career agree that automation is only an aid to testing and not replacing testing itself. There are pushes from some communities who are not aware of how testing is done to vilify testing as manual testing that's slow, error prone, and repetitive. There are also pushes from organizations to achieve 100% automation, although it won't make any sense to do that at all costs and in all contexts. In my experience, I have used automation as and where required to check system states, for test data generation, to check configuration aspects, and to some extent automating some test scenarios. Most of the analysis while testing is done by me, the human, to orient and lead the testing, to tread the paths that are relevant in the context. What are your thoughts on this?
I fully agree. So that's been my definition of automation all along. To me, automation is nothing more than using tools to support your testing efforts. And I totally subscribe to the idea that using tools is not testing. So it's not like automation is replacing testing. That's not what it's about. It's about supporting testing. It's about using tools, hopefully in a smart way, to perform specific tasks. Some of the tasks, a subset of all the tasks that make up testing in a more efficient manner through smart use of tools. And over the last couple of years, through the work of some quite vocal people have seen that, and people have started to. I noticed that people are slowly starting to adopt that view as well. Some of them a little bit more quickly than others. I think it's shared within the testing world. So most of us as testers, most of the testing community understands that. And I think the biggest challenge is how do we communicate? How do we talk about that to the wider software development and IT world in general? How do we make sure that we're all on the same page, that everybody understands that indeed automation isn't something that replaces testing, or isn't even something that can do testing for you. It can support testing, and there's still we're doing okay. I think that's slowly starting to sink in.
Absolutely.
But there's still some way to go.
Yeah. So as a method of propagating this to the community, wider community, we could use conferences, test conferences, as well as our own blogs. Like I do, I write a lot about testing and automation, how automation helps in testing, etc.
Oh, absolutely. There's one challenge though that we still need to overcome there. I'm sorry if I interrupted you, by the way. I'm Dutch. It's what we do. So my apologies for that. But one of the challenges there is software testing conferences are mainly attended by software testers. Software testing blogs are mainly read by software testers. So one thing that we need to be aware of is that we don't get stuck in an echo chamber of we as testers. We all agree that, well, yes, tools are there to support testing. Tools do not do the testing. Tools do not replace testers. It's the wider world that we need to speak to. And yeah, blogs are fantastic. Conferences are fantastic. Absolutely. I love writing blogs. I love reading them. I love going to conferences. I love to speak into conferences. But one thing that we definitely do need to keep in mind is that, well, there's this wider world out there outside the software testing community that we definitely need to take into account that as well.
A couple of thoughts there. I've been talking to someone and they asked how to have a platform where the developers and testers can have their views shared. And I propose that we can have a product conference rather than a programming conference or a testing conference separately. If we can have some kind of product conference where all the stakeholders can participate, like product owners, business analysts, testers, and developers, and discuss about what is the best for the community. So that's one thing that I have in mind. The other point that you mentioned about blogs, maybe I'm going to give a try of using the relevant hashtags to include the software development community also. For example, there is a hashtag called software development, and we could use that when we are posting our blog so that the software development community is also cognizant of what we are posting and they go through the articles. So those are my thoughts on that.
Yeah, no, and I think more people should follow your example. That and try to speak. No, try to reach that wider audience and try to get people. So, and I think I'm not saying that we don't do that or that we suck at it, but
no, we do, but it's
yeah. There's a lot left to do.
Correct. And so the next point I have is, of course, about this automation scripts itself. I know that it's a lot of pain to maintain, and people are talking about millions of scripts. I don't disagree, because in Fong kind of companies, or where pretty much everything is automated, for places like web services companies, where you cannot expect human intervention in a big a scripted world where the development phase and the testing phase automatically go through a lot of pipelines. I agree with that. But the major challenge here is how do you maintain the scripts? Because if you have so much of scripts, so from your experience, what do you think? How do you maintain this many number of scripts, and how do you assess the quality of these automation scripts?
That's a lot of different questions into one.
Sorry for throwing all that out.
No worries at all. So let's try and slowly unpack that. So the first thing is, my first question is, if you talk about, I don't know if it's actually millions, or if that's just, hopefully that's just figure of speech, but you're talking about thousands or tens of thousands of
No, it is
tests.
millions of
Literally millions.
yes. This I heard from one of the prominent automation testers, which I know of, which I interacted recently with. I don't want to name them, but that
No,
would
that's
put
okay.
them
That's
on the
okay.
spot. But yeah,
No, that's totally fine. But so my first question would be: do you really need so many?
exactly.
That would be my very first question. So, but well, let's assume that you do, that they've made a cut for each and every of those many tests. They are there for good reason. They've thought long and hard about it. Is this valuable? Let's just assume that, just for the sake of argument. The next question is: does that do all of the tests really give you all the feedback that you need? Do they give the right feedback? Do they give trustworthy feedback? Wow. So and you can tell probably from me thinking out loud that I've dealt with projects with a large number of tests, but not to that size.
I'm just wondering.
I just feel for the new guy in the team, for the new person in the team that suddenly faced, well, yeah, hello, here's our code base, and here are our thousands and thousands and thousands of tests, gazillions of tests. Good luck.
Yeah,
it must be hard being that person.
Yeah, that brings. Okay, so I agree with you, and I have the same kind of thoughts. And I think at some point of time, so imagine the code base. If you have so many tests, how does the source code looks like, and how this development is going to?
It must be either it must be a humongous code base, or there's just lots and lots and lots and lots of tests, which brings me back to my initial question: do you really need all of them? So I'm a big fan of. So people talk about coverage a lot, and I don't hate talking about coverage, but a lot of people see coverage as a goal. So we need X% of, and it doesn't really matter if it's line, branch, field, whatever kind of requirements. I don't really care about the type of coverage. And people talk about as if that some kind of magic number, and often for it's 95 to 100%, as if that's the golden standard, so to say. If only we achieve that percentage of coverage, then we are doing well. And the problem I've got with that is that it's a quantitative metric. So it tells you about the amount of tests that you've wrote, the amount of code that has been exercised during the execution of the tests. But it doesn't tell you a whole lot, or arguably it doesn't tell you anything about the quality of those tests.
Yeah, and
also that comes back to, well, do you really need all of them? Are they trustworthy? Are they actually giving information that's valuable, that you can and that's actionable? And you were going to say something.
Yeah. So I was just wondering about the test data versus coverage, and you could have coverage of 100%, but you could still miss some test data that needs to be covered.
Oh, absolutely. There's so much to miss. And you could get to 100% code coverage without doing a single assertion, for example.
Yeah, true.
It's and we all laugh about this, but we've all seen people do this just because somebody wanted that magic coverage number, and they even configured the pipelines to break when that coverage percentage wasn't met. And then what you get is people just start writing stupid tests,
right?
Just to get the pipeline to not break anymore, instead of thinking about, is this really something that I need? is this something that's valuable for me?
I guess the industry needs a lot of education, but as you said, how are we going to go about it? It's different levels of um, challenges involved, with different people, with different mindsets, whether the automation is written by the developers or by the testers. So there are so many factors involved. Anyway,
There's a lot still to talk about and to improve. And another thing is that each context and each team
exactly.
is unique, and some of them, well, they do full continuous delivery and DevOps, and everybody contributes, and there's people continuously work together through pairing or mobbing to share knowledge and to have that 4 eyes. So they do basically synchronous code reviews, because that's what pair programming is.
Right.
You do synchronous code reviews, so which means you probably don't even need things like feature branches anymore. You can do trunk-based development instead. So there are a lot of teams and companies that, and especially if you go to LinkedIn, a lot of people that boast, well, look how awesome we are. But the reality is there are so many teams and organizations that still have, first of all, they still have a long way to go, and second of all, what those companies that are talking on LinkedIn, Twitter, on their blogs about, look at how awesome we are.
No, you're right.
Their way of working might not even be the best for.
No, it's not.
That's so difficult. That's so difficult.
It's not, because it exactly brings to the next point that I wanted to talk to you about, which is about mutation testing.
We are really going all over the place. I love it. Keep them coming.
Mutation testing, I just went through it to figure out, it sounded like an awesome concept, because whenever I talk about assessing the quality of automation scripts, people come up with this answer, oh, we do mutation testing. So I just wanted to go through what it is and what it does and how is it solving the automation scripts quality problem. And what a
I'm not sure if I would use the word solve there, but because again, it's a tool, and tools can help you, and tools can be a pain in the behind.
No, it is.
But no, they cannot. It's the concept fascinates me. So I've seen interest and the demand for it. So I've done some talks on it with live demos. I've run some workshops on it, conferences, and even with some clients. And it's so the interest is growing because someone, and I don't know why. And that's been something that's been happening in the last year or so. But mutation testing is an old concept. It's been around literally for decades, but it's really only recently that people have started to notice it, which I think is fascinating and strange.
Right. So I wrote a blog about it, about my feelings on that, and I'll share that with you. I'll also share this in the podcast so that people can look at it. But my thing is like, you have this figuratively speaking, you have two people pointing the gun at each other on their foreheads and see who is going to blink first. That's how I see it.
That's an interesting way of looking at it.
So that's what I feel about it. Because from an engineering perspective, as an engineer, I want to maintain 3 code bases: one with the mutation tests, one with the automation test, and the other one with the real source code. So that's going to make my head spin. That's what I thought. From a maintenance perspective, it's going to be a nightmare.
So the way I have it, it's not a separate code base, so it's a different tool. And it can be, if you want to make that part of your pipeline, which I'm not always sure is a good idea, but it's a helpful tool to periodically assess the quality of your tests. Most notably unit test, because it's most effective at that level. But again, for those of you who do not know what mutation testing is a technique supported by tools that deliberately make small changes in your application code base, then runs your existing tests to see if they catch those changes. And if they catch those changes, your tests are doing what they are supposed to do. If mutants, so these small changes, get passed by unnoticed by your tests, again, that could be your unit tests, there's probably something that you need to investigate. So either you need more tests or better tests, or the code that has been changed is irrelevant. That could also be an interesting outcome. But I don't see it as a third set of tests, really, because they are generated. Those mutation testing tools, they generate mutants from your existing source code and then run your existing tests against it.
Okay. So there is TDD, and so you can use TDD to do test-driven development so that you don't need mutation tests at all. But that's another topic to talk about.
Yeah, no, it's they're all techniques, and that can work together beautifully. Arguably, with TDD, you might not need as much mutation testing, because what I love about TDD is that you've seen your tests fail, because that's part of the process. First, you write a failing test, so you know your tests can fail. And the problem with a lot of tests is that, well, they don't pick up on changes. Well, with TDD, they do pick up on changes, because first they fail, then you write some production code, and then suddenly, well, not suddenly, it's hopefully intentional, but after a while, your tests pass. So you know that those tests are capable of, that they are executed and they're capable of detecting changes.
Yeah.
So they're capable, they can fail because you've seen them fail.
Okay. Cool. Let's talk about automation languages. I recently came across an article, actually a research paper, which compared multiple automation scripting languages, in fact, programming languages. And it said that C is the most efficient in terms of speed, energy consumed, and resources consumed, whereas Python is too much down in the list, and JavaScript and Java are somewhere in the middle. That was a shocker to me, because I'm a Python fan. So because of the climate change, the energy consumed by the web services companies, how much lowest energy we can consume as far as possible, it'd be a good idea to use a language like C or C++, but how feasible it is for the automation, and do you think it's a good idea?
So I like the idea. So I'm all for reducing your energy consumption. Absolutely. So I try. I'm not always the best at it, but I try and be more conscious about it myself. I think it's much so.
By the way, just to be fair, this paper was released in 2016 or 2017. I don't know the latest one, but this is 5 years back.
I don't think a lot of, so the languages haven't changed that much.
Yeah.
I think, especially C and C++, not.
But Python is.
I think that's just part of the story, because with I think just using C or C++, there's a lot of things that you can't really do with C and C++, or they're just much more difficult to do compared to a higher order language. So, and that brings with itself a lot of inefficiencies. I think we could produce a lot more, a lot faster, if we weren't so bloody focused on all these full stack end-to-end browser-based tests.
Yeah, true.
I think so. Again, I have nothing against those tools and those tests, but people still think like that. That's the holy grail of it, and but people sometimes fail to realize that those are the hard. First of all, it's the hardest type of tests to write. They take the longest to run, which means the most the highest power consumption. They're the hardest to maintain. They're the hardest to do well. They take the longest time. They're by far the most expensive to write and run. And everybody starts there, which is still mind-boggling to me. So people new to testing and automation say, well, I want to learn Selenium, Playwright, Cypress. Doesn't really matter what tool or library it is, but and those libraries are fantastic. But what people forget is that, well, that's really throwing you in the deep end as a budding tester, automation engineer, whatever you want to call it. It's starting with the absolute hardest type of testing there is. The hardest type of automation there is, really, I should say.
People really want to have keywords in their resumes, right? So,
yes. Oh, yeah.
And that's the motivation behind running behind these tools. And I heard somewhere recently that automation jobs are paying better than human done testing. So with all due respects, I don't know why the industry is like that, but it has to change.
Supply and demand. So companies are going crazy finding people who know how to use those tools, or at least who say they know how to use those tools, who write in their CV that they know how to use those. Those are two different things. Writing something in your CV and actually being capable of doing that. But that's an entirely different discussion. And then it's simply supply and demand. It's in demand because everybody wants to go faster and automate stuff and do stuff more efficiently, which in itself is understandable, noble even. And so you get a lot of people saying, well, that's what I should learn. And then organizations see, well, this is what testers do. So they click around in applications on their screen and they do stuff. Let's replicate that with tools because that's obviously much, much cheaper, they think. Not fully realizing that that's so the way I typically talk about that is application software software has many interfaces. Your code, your application code is an interface. APIs are an interface. Your database is an interface, and your graphical user interface is obviously it's in the name. It's also an interface. The problem or the challenge here is that graphical user interface is the only interface in your application that's specifically written for human beings to interact with. While all these other interfaces, APIs, databases, your code, are meant to be consumed by computers or by other pieces of code, really, which makes them much, much easier to automate because they're written for software to they're written for being consumed by software, whereas a graphical user interface is written explicitly to be consumed by a human being. And again, tools are not human beings, and most human beings aren't tools. So human. So
I like the way you put it.
So that's still. And again, I've been there. I've done this for some 16 years now, and I was much the same for at least the first 10 years. So I'm not a saint. I'm not better than everybody. So I've been there too. I've automated so much useless stuff through a graphical user interface and spent so many hours and days and weeks.
I can figure.
And with trying to get something to work that wasn't really all that reliable and valuable in the first place.
Exactly. What are your thoughts on Test Oracle?
So first of all, that's it. It's so I'm familiar with the term Test Oracle. It's not something I've given a lot of thought to. To me, if you'd ask me what a Test Oracle is, it's just a collection of codified, known. Well, truth is a bit of a loaded word, so to say. But to me, a Test Oracle is the collection of codified, known beliefs. Let's call it beliefs about how the system should work. And a test compares an observed outcome, so a result produced by a piece of code or a system, against a known codified truth that's pulled from that oracle, and then reports on whether or not there's a match between those two. So to me, that's what automation does, is observing actual outcomes and comparing that at predefined expected codified outcomes. So the collection of predefined codified expected outcomes, that's to me a test oracle. Now, where I struggle with, and please tell me if that's the same for you, what I struggle with is I think I tend to agree with what you say, is that, well, it should be human, maybe not a human who is the oracle, but it should be a human who creates that or feeds that oracle. What I do have a problem with is these tools that claim they auto-generate tests from specifications, and because they don't only create the test, so they sort of kind of implicitly also create the oracle without human intervention. And that's where I struggle, because how do you know that they generate the right thing? How do you know that how do you know that what they observe as the truth, so what they feed into the oracle, is actually something that we want, or we think we want, or that's desirable, or that's actually valuable? There's still a lot, I think, that is, at least that with current, I can't see too far into the future. I've stopped trying to do that. But especially, I think we are still in a situation where it's probably best if we leave that to humans.
Right. And I was just thinking about that. First, let's sort this end-to-end tests trouble, which is running slow, which is there's a lot of complaint from the community that it is slow and inefficient and things like that. And maybe we should skip the end-to-end tests altogether from the automation and make the humans do it.
That's a bit of a radical thought. I don't say I disagree, but when we talked about this a little bit earlier, one of the things is that in very much in line with what you said, I just don't want to be as radical as you are. We said, well, just skip that altogether. What I would like to see more people and teams do is, instead of again, in terms of coverage, instead of striving for as many tests as we want, as high a level of automation as we want, how about striving for as little as you can get away with? So I do focus on doing just enough instead of doing more, and just creating this humongous. Again, I'm referring back to that early case that you talked about with the companies with what you said, millions of tests. I'm really not all that convinced that those are actually all necessary. So why, instead of doing more, why don't we just focus on trying to do a little bit less, and without, of course, without losing sight of the things that we really need to do. And so it's always a balance between the risk that you run not doing something and the effort it takes to actually do something.
Right. And then the latest approach that people are taking in terms of end-to-end test is not to have all the screens navigated and then come to the end screen like a shopping cart or something like that, where you do the checkout and make sure that the payment is made. Instead of going through all the screens, use APIs to feed the data till the last screen and validate only the last screen with the API data, and then just assert only those cart related details to make sure that things are working as expected.
Sounds really good. Sounds like a very good idea to me, because again, that's using tools more efficiently and using tools together with the interfaces, the applications that are actually meant to be consumed by tools. For example, those APIs, and then just do things a little bit more efficient instead of just relying on those slow, bulky, clunky, flaky end-to-end tests.
Yes, and in fact, it's an interesting thought that has been being discussed in many forums, to just replace UIs with APIs as far as possible, even when the automation is concerned, not just the product is concerned, but even with the automation.
Yeah, it's basically, you should never do with a UI test something that can reasonably well be done with an API test.
Right.
Or maybe even with a comprehensive set of unit tests.
Correct.
And again, that doesn't discredit the concept of UI tests, because they can be valuable. It should just be, it can often be a much smaller set than people actually think. And also, and what you said about moving some of the setup or the creation of the initial state away and abstracting that away to API level, API calls, for example. Or if you really want to test the UI, why not test the UI in isolation? So just write unit. It's perfectly possible to write unit tests for your UI. You don't, if you're really interested in some logic that's happening in your HTML, CSS, and JavaScript layer, why not write unit tests for that? You don't need a backend to do that.
Correct. Right. Yeah. So we could take approaches which will make it as efficient and effective as possible in this. So many valuable inputs from you. So I'm going to ask you to give some tips to the younger generation and who are just getting into the software testing field on how to learn and grow in automation. So what are your thoughts about how they should go about it, and what are the tips that you can give for them?
Oh wow, I could go on for it, so I'll try and keep it short.
Okay.
So first of all, I sincerely hope it takes you less time than me to realize what not to do.
So what not to do? Maybe you can.
So again, at what we talked about, spending so much time and effort, just trying to throw tools at problems and hoping that it solves your problem.
Yeah.
And with all through the graphical user interface building all.
Right.
So there's a couple of things that I really want to address. First of all, yes, as we talked about earlier, tools do not solve problems. Humans solve problems. Sometimes they use tools to do that, but there's so much, and that's in testing and software development and IT in general. the world in general, really, it's humans who solve problems. So focus on the human, not just on the tool aspect. Second of all, so I've got a list, and you just tell me when to stop. Learn object-oriented programming as an automation engineer. Learn object-oriented. So yes, learn some tools, absolutely, but also learn much at the fundamental, some of the fundamental concepts of object-oriented programming. Don't be that guy who's an expert just in Selenium and Java. Be someone who knows how to use object-oriented programming and how to use libraries and pick different libraries and solve a problem there. That's going to be a much more that's going to make you a much more versatile and flexible and valuable engineer in the longer
run. Talking about object-oriented programming, do you recommend using the design patterns that's already there? Like there are 23 design patterns, or do you want to come up with specific test-specific design patterns?
In terms of pure coding, no. I think there's good reason that those patterns exist. I definitely don't use all of them. I don't even know all of them or understand all of them. But they can be helpful. So and when you're writing tests, when you're writing test code, you're writing code. So it's not like test code is some kind of special unicorn kind of thing that is worthy, that deserves its own patterns. It's code. So why not do as we've been doing with what regular application production code, and use those patterns, because they can be extremely helpful in your test code as well. And that's what I meant by, well, study object-oriented programming a little bit more. Make sure that you become a better programmer, because that's going to help you write much more efficient test code as well.
Right. Wow. So
and final thing, sorry for interrupting you once again.
Go ahead.
Please don't lose sight of what you're actually doing, which is software testing. So I've seen so many people, I want to move from tester to automation engineer, or SDET, or whatever you want to call it. Super enterprise test automation architect special deluxe. You're still testing. You're just using tools to do some stuff more efficiently. So I've seen too many automation engineers, and I've probably been one myself as well, who were reasonably skilled in writing code, but not very good testers. That's also, and I could go on. I could fill another podcast with this, just with with what I think about being an automation engineer, and if I even think that that's a good idea. But let's not go there now, because, well, we're sort of kind of starting to run out of time, I see. But it's still testing. It's yes, you're writing code, but that's meant to support the testing that you do. So please don't keep working, sharpening those testing skills as well, next to your coding. And yes, that's hard, but again, that's the split that you're in when you're working in automation. So part of you is software developer, and part of you is tester. And too many people in the automation field, that they focus all on the development and the tools part, and they forget about the testing part, with less than ideal results often.
Right. And I would like to add that in addition to testing, one should also not lose focus on the domain knowledge.
Yes.
The industry
and industry knowledge, what the client wants. Personal, what people call soft skills, but that are actually the hard skills. But interpersonal and interpersonal skills. There's so much to unpack there. It's so much more than just again, being an automation engineer that throws tools at problems and hope that somehow magically those problems will disappear.
What are your hobbies and interests? What do you do for fun?
Besides coming on podcasts, you mean? No, so yeah, what I read a lot, and not typically not what you see people posting on LinkedIn. Say, well, I'm going on a holiday and I'm taking these 10 business books because those are going to be my beach reads. No, I read a lot of crime and detective fiction. So that's what I love to do. Just sit on the couch or outside and in the sun with a good book. I like running. I've been doing that for a while, and I've been getting injured a couple of times. So, but I properly started running again in the beginning of the year, and that's going pretty well. So I like doing that as well. And I am trying to learn Italian.
Wow. Any specific reason?
I love the country, the culture, the food, the coffee, the desserts, the gelato. It's not because I want to move there or anything, although I wouldn't mind, but I just think it's a fascinating culture. It's a beautiful language. So yeah.
So do you have any preferences in music, or music is not your thing?
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. I am quite eclectic, to be honest. So everything from classical to house music to some rock to I don't really do jazz, to be honest. That's I probably because I just don't understand it. I love a bit of blues. So yeah, it's diverse, really.
Okay.
Oh yeah, and so I grew up in the 90s. So anything that smells or sounds like the 90s, anything from grunge to Eurodance, anything that you can find me listening to that a lot as well.
Fantastic. Very nice talking to you, Bas. So we should keep in touch. I'll be in touch in LinkedIn. I don't see you in Twitter.
No, that's true. I've not been on Twitter for a couple of years now. So I was quite an active user until a couple of years ago, and I decided to quit.
Okay. You are doing a great work in LinkedIn, educating people about software testing. All the courses that you come up with are gold, as I mentioned to you earlier. The API testing with Python especially was very valuable to me. And recently I also saw a topic about contract testing that I think you are going to work on soon. So please keep up with the great work, and thank you so much for all the contributions to the software testing community. It's a pleasure.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me, Venkat. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much for your time. Take care. Bye-bye.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
That was a wonderful discussion on automation for testing with Bas Dijkstra. We hope that you enjoyed the podcast. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel to be informed on such podcasts with industry experts and software testing practitioners. We look forward to see you soon in the next podcast. Thank you.